Am I coming through?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear. Welcome, everyone, to the 1500th episode of ChefAJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, who could be more amazing than today's guest? He really needs no introduction, but in case you just crawled out of a cave, this is none other than Dr. T. Colin Campbell, the author of so many wonderful books on nutrition, the China Study, Whole, most recent, The Future of Nutrition. He has one more book that I don't have in hard book form. I bought it on Audible called The Low Carb Fraud. And he's one of the most amazing people that in this space that I think anyone knows. And I'm so honored to have him here to celebrate our 1500th episode. Please welcome Dr. T. Colin Campbell. Thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Campbell. It's been such a while since you've been on the show, so I'm glad to see you again.
Yes, it's nice to be in the 1500th spot.
Yeah.
That shows you've been busy.
Yeah. Well, the last 3 years, you have such a great, people don't know what a great sense of humor you have, do they?
I don't know.
If they know you, but people are saying how much you changed their lives. And I think, when I think about it, I've been vegan for 46 years now. And when I see people, especially the doctors and especially people that are newer, it always seems that the book that they read is this one. Did you have any idea it was going to be such a success, this book?
No, I didn't. As a matter of fact, I guess I've told this story a number of times, but I don't want to be repetitive. I was having a lot of difficulty in the scientific community with my ideas, and I was complaining. And one day, Karen told me, "So stop complaining. Go write a book for the public." So I say that because when I was inclined not to do that, because it's not exactly the track that scientists take. And so I didn't expect it to do anything, but it did a lot. And she was right. So I'm going to blame her for this. I didn't expect it to do anything, to be honest about it, but it has now been translated to 50 foreign languages, even more.
That's amazing. 50 foreign languages. I'm going to be honest. I didn't read the book, but I listened to it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was just, it was beyond my pay grade, but listening really helped me understand it. And it's a book that so many people point to as the reason that they adopted a plant-based diet. And as a matter of fact, you're the one that coined the term plant-based, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did back in the late 1970s. I hadn't got exactly on that track at that point in time, but I was in a transitory period. And I was asked by my colleagues on a government committee that I was on that determines who gets funding and who doesn't, in their cancer research. And they wanted me to talk about a few applications that were coming in that hinted that nutrition might make a difference for cancer. And so I took some time, and I didn't want to use the word vegetarian, vegan, to be honest about it. I don't track exactly, the science behind that is not exactly what I talk about. So I tried to think of another word and thought it might go further. So I said plant-based, and then 3 or 4 years later, I added the word whole after being the one testifying on behalf of the government on some claims about things that weren't exactly right. Anyway, I put the two words together. That's what it was.
I'm glad you added the word whole to it, because plant-based can be extremely unhealthy if it's not whole.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Do we have another book to look forward to from you?
Yeah, I've got one now. I don't have a name for it, but I'm 2/3 the way done. More than that, maybe I'm 80% the way done. I'm doing something might be considered to be a bit stupid and risky, but I'm used to that world. Basically, the question that arises for all of us, I think, is why haven't the public really adopted this concept of nutrition? Why is it taking so long? And so I got a perspective that's not usually told. And that is what goes on behind the curtain in science, what's going on behind the curtain in policy, in food and health policy. I've got a lot of experiences, so I'm telling those experiences. I know what I'm doing is some risk. I don't like to complain, about individuals doing the wrong thing. But, I've seen it, and it tells so much. It tells so much why it's so difficult. When in fact, eating plants in a whole food form is a big deal. It's really, really big.
Do you have a title for the book yet?
I don't. I just haven't quite figured it out. Karen wants me to use the word control because it's all about who controls the information. And that has a lot to do with it.
Nice.
It is about control, really. You could guess who's doing all the controlling, but it's very pervasive. Involves a lot of agencies and people and ideas, but it all comes down to one thing. It's those who make money on the idea of nutrition. They kind of like to control their work, and so it's tough. I mean, I'm saying a lot of things that people sort of already know, but they don't know the details and how it really happens. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, that's fantastic. I can't wait to read this book. Well, do you see this changing anytime soon?
Well, there have been some changes in the last, 10, 20, 30 years, I guess, in a way. The word, that plant-based thing that I was hoping would have created a wider audience. And so it took some time. Gosh, I didn't see the word around much for the first 20 years. But then in the last, 10, 15 years, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. And I mean, veganism, vegetarian, let's face it, it's fine. But and there's an audience for that, and there's a reason, a rationale for following that idea about ethics, especially when the welfare of animals. That's fine and dandy, but I've lived in the world of science. I have to look at data, and I was from a farm, as you know, milking cows, and I did a doctoral dissertation on promoting the consumption of more animal protein. That's where it came from. So, for me to actually transition from that perspective, that point of view, especially professionally, was a big deal. That was a big deal. And so I wanted to, as much as possible, emphasize that I did that because of the data. I mean, I was on the other side of the argument. And what I saw was so convincing. So we changed our own diets too because of that. And I just find that people, when they hear the basic arguments and the science and they can look at it, it's hard to walk away from it. And so that's what I'm basically all about.
How have you been spending your time these days?
How do I?
How have you been spending your time these days, especially since the pandemic? Because you used to travel quite extensively.
Yeah, I did. I still travel some, not very much. Do a lot of virtual lectures for one. And I'm sitting and writing, which I've done all my life, I guess. I don't know, that's what I've been doing. And I still got some more to do. I think we're going to have to wrap up that part of my life. But
what's the best change you've seen in your lifetime?
Gosh, that's a really good question. The change is most remarkable, at least now, is for the worse, unfortunately, not for the best. I mean, you want an answer. What do I see that gives me hope? I guess it gives us hope, and it's this idea of really understanding what the word nutrition really means. The word nutrition gets used interchangeably with the word food, with the word diet, and it really means something different. Nutrition is the stuff that goes on in our bodies after we consume food. It's truly amazing. And it's all the nutrients working together from a certain class of foods. It's that simple. And when you start looking at all these so-called reactions and all this fancy, very highly technical stuff, what you see is that you see Mother Nature working, the way I'd like to put it. Mother Nature knows what she's doing. She's been doing it for a few million years and sort of developing this, creating this complexity, infinitely complex, but do it in such a way that everything tends to work together when you eat the right food. It's truly amazing. And so, I don't know, I've really gotten caught up and got very excited about that idea.
You know, you say something in this book, Whole, that I love. I mean, you can write all the books you want, but I think you've kind of encapsulated it on page 7 of Whole, where you say the ideal human diet looks like this: consume plant-based foods in forms as close to their natural state as possible, whole foods, eat a variety of vegetables, fruits, raw nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, and whole grains, avoid heavily processed food and animal products, stay away from added sugar, oil, and salt. And I mean, what more do you need to know?
Yeah, I think that's why I say whole food, plant-based. I mean, that just kind of captures an enormous amount of complexity that we'll never be able to know exactly what goes on. And, you know, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence and fancy computers or not, that kind of technical expertise and magic will never fully describe exactly what everything is doing, where it's going, how it interacts, and so forth and so on. I mean, that all the technical stuff, it's interesting, it helps you inform, but there's something more just causing all this stuff to work together. It's just incredible. It's indisputable.
You said you wanted to title today's discussion, because you have to have a title in order to broadcast, Simplifying Food and Health. Is that basically it, what you wrote in that paragraph, or is there more to it?
No, that sounds good, AJ.
Okay, then we'll just say goodbye to the viewers. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding, of course. Yeah. That's, you know, it's amazing because the whole family is on board. You know, we talked to so many people that struggle because their husband or their wife or their kids won't do it. You've got a huge family of children and grandchildren, and they all seem to have gotten the memo.
Well, thanks to Karen, my wife. This is our 61st year. And so she wasn't into this at the beginning. I was not into this, and we come from somewhat different backgrounds. But nonetheless, she really got excited about when I was finally decided to write a book, because she said the children of the world had to know this. So that was her big thing. And they don't. The parents don't know this well enough to start their children out in life, you know, taking this seriously.
Yes. Did I hear you correctly that you've been doing this for 61 years?
Now, I was married 61 years over.
Oh,
60 years.
okay.
I've been doing it longer than that. If I count my graduate work, when I was doing research showing the importance of animal protein, for example, that started in 1956.
Wow.
Add up the numbers. I think it's the 67th year that I've been doing this research. Yeah.
Wow. And when did you adopt the plant-based diet personally?
Well, it's gradual. I mean, the evidence started. I mean, what I saw in the very beginning, or fairly soon in the beginning, that my belief about animal protein being important, because we all, in professional nutrition, we all kind of believe that, you know, it's a very important nutrient. We have to have some, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I was in the Philippines working with malnourished children and creating a program there where we were supposed to give them protein, animal protein especially, I saw some evidence that did not seem believable. The kids consuming the most protein, animal protein that is, for the most part, they were the ones likely to get liver cancer by the age of 4. I mean, it's spectacular. I said, no, wait a minute, that's not true. That can't be true. And then there was a study in India showing something similar, and the Indian researchers didn't believe it themselves either. So there was only one choice for me, because my senior and myself were trying to put together this program for kids. But we can't start giving them animal protein, which everybody was doing, you know, when you have that kind of data. So I came home and applied for a grant from NIH and a grant for money to do the research. And I just simply said, you know, I need to know. I didn't quite believe that. That was crazy. And we got into doing the research, and that I like science a lot. And science actually keeps control of our minds. You have to control your own biases. And we have a structure to do that. So I had biases. And there's a certain way of doing that so that you don't get trapped into saying things that, you know, you think might be true and pretend they are true. That's crazy. So I did that research. I had that grant. That grant went on for that and an adjacent grant, a couple of others, for 40 years, including the study in China. So in the beginning, it was in the laboratory, trying to understand, is this really true? Does animal protein promote the development of cancer? It was spectacular. It was absolutely spectacular. And, we increase animal protein, turns the cancer on, it grows well. We switch it to plant protein or drop the animal protein, one or the other, the cancer turns off. We can turn cancer on and off. And it wasn't a question of genes being responsible for the cancer, like everybody wanted to believe. That was the byline, in the profession, that cancer starts with genes. And that's it, end of story. If you have the genes, okay, you got a problem. But no, what we saw was something dramatically different. It wasn't the genes. Cancer starts with genes. Well, everything starts with genes, but it was the way in which the gene activity is controlled. That's what it was, and that's a question of nutrition. So it was a big deal. I mean, for me, as I say, it's a major crossroads, I guess you could say, in understanding this discipline. So that went to China, organized that study too with my colleagues, and I got some really good colleagues to work with, and fantastic opportunity in China. I wanted to see if what we're in the laboratory with experimental animals, by the way, I wanted to see if this worked in humans. So we went to China. It was a marvelous opportunity because, cancer in certain parts of China is high and other parts of China is low. I mean, big differences, really huge differences. And so with an ideal opportunity to go there and collect information to see what really accounted for these high rates of cancer for about a dozen different kinds of cancers. And it turned out that basically it was almost the same answer across the board. And now I might add the same answer for viruses. That's the more exciting part of it just recently. This eating plants in a whole food form, it has this major, comprehensive effect on our health that if we don't do it right, we are susceptible to a much higher risk for getting cancer, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, heart disease, whatever. And so I've been assembling some data, actually, some information was kind of lying around in science in years past that got published, but with suggesting the wrong interpretation. So that's this new book is partly that too. That if we go back and look at the data really seriously, not just get locked into all this fancy language, this very highly technical language that few people can really understand, but rather try to explain it in a way that it becomes obvious to, I guess, everyone. It's in a way it's kind of fun. It's like playing chess. You're there and you're competing against an opponent, and you got alternative ideas. And I always enjoyed the idea of debate and being with people who didn't agree with what I might say. Well, that's the beauty of science, and then getting active in that conversation, in a civil manner. You don't just shouting, hollering back and forth, which has become too much of the dialect for today. But actually sharing, our interpretations, then coming up with something at the end of the day that's better than any of us might have thought. It's beautiful. So,
you say you don't mind having a debate. So when you have detractors or people that are trying to debunk the China study, that doesn't bother you?
Well, it depends on who's doing the detracting and what they're saying. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the detractors have other objectives, and they're supported by some very powerful interests. And I don't care for that kind of debate. I mean, I did have to live early on after I had testified before a congressional committee, especially. It was a National Academy panel, all that stuff. I was getting in the news quite a bit, and People magazine had a big story, etc. Well, then I had crossed the line, and there was a petition put forward in my professional community. Right at the time I was selected to be the president, was put forward to have me thrown out of my society the first time in 65 years. and I had to go to attend a hearing in Washington. And I misbehaved, and it was very powerful forces at that time. And they lost, I won in a sense when the vote came down to it. But that's the kind of stuff. And then on another occasion, a petition put to have me thrown out of Cornell. And on and on. I can tell you, that's what I'm telling somebody stuff in the book, because that's the kind of stuff that we're all up against. And there's only one thing, I have to say this because it's really significant. The public may not know this concept all that well, but I was able to do what I did because I had academic freedom. In other words, in a faculty position, you in due course, you could be selected to have a lifetime position, along with the opportunity to say what you want to say. And I got that very early on in the 1930s, and when I was in my 30s. And so I was very fortunate. I didn't know at the time, but if I didn't have academic freedom, I would not be sitting here now telling this story. It's that simple. And unfortunately, academic freedom in universities has been almost lost now, intentionally. That's one of the stories I'm telling them. I'm telling how that happened. So a lot of people want to call themselves scientists. And that's not, I have to say, I don't want to be too cross about this. That does not include people in the field of medicine. They're not taught this. And now there's a certain proportion of them gradually learn it in due course. But in any case, the point is that it's all about debating stuff, in the open, fresh air, and having, as I say, these debates if possible. That's almost disappeared. Now everybody's sort of hunkered down, in their own sort of little cubbyhole and want to tell their story with a spin on their stories. And it's tough. So to answer your question, I don't like people who are fundamentally, unfortunately, dishonest. They make up stories, and as if something. That's not fun.
No.
But I do like the debate.
I want to ask you a question about that, but first, I want to thank Dave for his super chat donation, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, for being here for the 1500th episode. Are you familiar with something called red pen reviews?
No, I'm not.
So we got really upset, the viewers of ChefAJ Live and myself, because I had the gentleman, Dr. Stephen Guillenet, who is the founder of this. They review scientific literature, and they didn't give the China study a very good review. And that really upset us because, for example, one of the things he says is the claim that animal foods play a key role in cardiovascular disease and cancer is not very well supported. But your work exactly shows that it is very well supported.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've got a good answer. Basically, when protein, let me start out with the word protein first. When in about 1840, in that period at that time, there was a gentleman in Holland, a chemist, who saw that dogs lived when they were fed meat. And if they didn't have meat, I mean, they could have survived on other food too, but when they didn't have meat, they died. So he wanted to know what's in that meat. Being a chemist, he isolated a compound. He isolated it, and he had to give it a name. And he and his colleagues, they gave it a name after the Greek word, Proteos, proteos. What that word means, first, or prime importance. So the word protein was taken from the Greek language, and it means first, or prime importance. It became so significant, so important, that protein, in this case from animal food, was considered the gem of life, the stuff of civilization, they called it. And then it kept that reputation throughout the ages. And so finally, that was in 1839, to be specific. Finally, around the turn of the century, around 1910 or so, there was some more work done that they realized that there was a compound of blood called cholesterol. And lo and behold, when people had high cholesterol, they seemed to have a higher risk for heart disease. So they are making the connection: high cholesterol, high heart disease. And then some nutritionists got involved and thought, well, high cholesterol comes from eating cholesterol. Well, that's an oversimplification, to be honest about it. So they quite frankly, they and several other research groups between 1910 and 1924, they got involved in trying to figure out what causes the cholesterol to go up in the blood. They finally concluded in 1924, 26, somewhere in that period there, that looking over all this information that was being collected at that time, it was not the cholesterol we were consuming that caused the cholesterol in the blood. It was also not the saturated fat. It simply wasn't. And the conclusion was, based on all this research, that it was animal protein. And so, unfortunately, you couldn't say anything bad about animal protein at that point in time. It was like a religion. So that didn't stick. It's what the community of the scientific institutions, essentially, they were high on, still having a high regard for animal protein. They didn't want things bad said about animal protein. So they started blaming it on saturated fat, total fat, stuff for cholesterol. That was wrong, just dead wrong. And so I started working in my time in the early 60s. And sure enough, it was the animal protein that caused the increase in cholesterol, and in turn leads to heart disease. So that whole narrative that became so popular, believed by everyone, basically, is wrong. What really matters is changing the animal protein on the diet. And I saw it from the standpoint that when we consume more animal protein, that increases the risk for cancer. Unmistakable. And so that person you're talking about, I would love to debate him. That is absolutely, totally wrong. He doesn't know it's or she or whatever it is. It's just simply not true.
I'm going to send you that information. And if that's something that can be done, I'd be happy to set that up. I'm curious, Dr. Campbell, what has been the professional highlight of your career?
Working with students. I had a lot of graduate students working on their graduate degrees, master's and doctoral degrees. And I think that's the first thing. And I did enjoy teaching. I liked working with students all those years because they're, young people coming in, they're obviously anxious to get on to doing something that they think might be worth doing and making it a career. And they have open minds, much better than older people. And, to be able to work with them and then walk through the substance, teaching in classes, and then going back and forth. And that's where my debate thing comes from. 3 times during my career, I organized a small course on what does it mean to debate? And I had students doing that. We had to take sides and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. And in science, literally classical science, not the technical, not the way science is used today. That's crazy. The word science is used in a very crude way, superficial way. But in classical science, there's it forms guardrails as to how we think. First off, to be a true scientist, you're supposed to be a skeptic. You look at things and you can challenge it and you say, I don't believe that, whatever. And so you form a hypothesis for testing. We could say things like, the moon is made out of cheese. I'm convinced of that. But what you're required to do next, with lots of transparency, organize some studies that everybody can look at and say, here, I'm going to do this and this and this to see if it's true. And then you collect some data. You actually back and forth, having that back and forth. You control biases. You control your own bias, and so forth. Finally, you get it all done. You summarize it all up, you write it up, and then you send it out for professional publication. At that point, the rule of the day is you get reviewed by at least 2 real professional people. They can disagree with you, they can do this and that, and then the author in turn gets a chance to reply, either answer the question, effectively or not. And if that all works out, that it's published. That's the process. So we can never escape. We can never escape critique. We can never escape transparency. So there it is. There's an expression, for example, that I really like. I've used a lot. There's a guy by the name of Neil Tyson recently has used it, and I like the way he explained it too. And that is that we own opinions. And most conversation in the public, 95% of his opinions. We own opinions, that's fair enough. We don't own facts. When a fact is discovered, nobody owns it. That's beyond all of us. We just have to figure, there it is, it can't be challenged. And so the idea of science is really a beautiful endeavor. I'm sorry I went on so long about this, but it really got me wound up. And that's the idea of working with students and teaching, and teaching something worthwhile, and really being going to all efforts to remove personal bias. And of course, that was a problem with me in spades. I'm coming from the farm, milking cows. And then, going off to school and doing a doctoral dissertation promoting the consumption of more animal protein, for crying out loud. That was just exactly the opposite. So when I started in and doing the research and getting always challenged, I had to do what I saw to be true. If it was not true, I didn't do everything right. I have to tell you, you do it. You organize your thoughts. You create the data, and then you put it up for discussion. And then you're playing chess. I'll make a move. You make a move. Stuff like that. And finally, you end up with an idea. Holy crow! This stuff that I was seeing was the opposite of what I thought, and it was the kind of stuff that keeps us healthy, for crying out loud. And so, I'm sorry, I went around the horn here too much, but in any case, it was in the late 1970s. We got some of the original data that was really challenging that whole concept, and so it was enough for Karen to get really interested. We started changing our diet, and so it took about 10 years to make the full switch by the late 1980s. And so we were there pretty much. Actually, I can tell you a little story to put the cap on this. She was, before we had completely changed, she was diagnosed with advanced melanoma. That's the most serious kind of cancer. So it was a bit of a shock because we thought we had done enough, and there it is. And she's at that time in her late 40s, and I'm in my early 50s. And so we went to the doctor and so forth and so on, an oncologist, and he sold us the hook, line, and sinker, tried to sell her on the idea what everybody's told to say. Like, here we're going to have you do that. It had advanced to her lymph glands. The cancer had advanced there, so it's metastatic. That's a very serious stage. And so at that point in time, she goes in for the visit, the final visit, where she's going to have an operation to take out the lymph, that lymph tissue, number one. Number two, be treated by all the chemotherapy. I had some second thoughts on it, but Karen knew also too. And I brought my paper in to show him, to try to educate the guy a bit. He brushed it away with his hand. And he said, this is what you're supposed to do. And she looked at him, she said, I'm not doing any of it. And he got angry. He said, ma'am, he said, you don't do this here in 6 months' time. I'm not going to be able to do anything for you. Well, so that's when we got really strict at the end of the day and tried to really do it right. That was now what's that? About 22 years ago, I think it is, or something like that. And nothing ever happened. The body, our body does stumble onto problems from time to time, and we don't know exactly why. But just having faith in what this whole thing is all about and doing it as well as one can is the best recipe. So she didn't, that melanoma didn't go any further. And of course, you've heard people tell this, and I've heard a lot of this. People saying they had this and that, had that, and kind of staying with it. And it's nothing is ever 100% perfect, because we don't know perfect information. But the odds are so heavily in favor of kind of staying with it, and doing what the science shows.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you don't let me talk too much, maybe.
No,
I
you
don't,
can talk. You can, hey, listen, you can talk as long as you want. I'm curious, you won or you were inducted into the Vegan Hall of Fame in 2006. That was 10 years before the China study even came out, I believe.
yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
So you were doing great things even before that book was published.
Well, I actually, I was lecturing on this subject, in the scientific community, I must say, in medical schools and stuff like that. I had been lecturing on that since the 1970s. So I had really already been lecturing at that time by, what is it, 25, 30 years. And yeah, I was enjoying that, in fact, too, because that was an opportunity to go to other professionals, and get critique and get good feedback. Yeah, that was kind of fun.
Nice. You were talking about when you changed your diet, and Susanna wanted to know, at that point, your children were probably already older. So was it a slow process or an overnight process? How did you get them to change their diet as well?
Well, I can say ask my wife, but but none. I can maybe tell what she always said to me. We started first off in 1980, and more or less at that time. For example, we started doing quitting red meat and eating chicken and fish. The white stuff. We thought that was a step in the right direction, and then also taking out the fat. Because I didn't have quite that information on the animal protein in that context at that time. And so we started to get lower fat foods. But during the 1980s, our favorite food was going to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Mostly living on that. And finally, in the late 80s, I had a problem. I had early in my career, I was the one who first isolated a very toxic compound, and I was paying a price for it. It's called dioxin. Dioxin is the active agent in Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam for spray in the forest. And so I was at MIT at the time in the 1960s, and I was supposed to be isolating from this oil that was being fed to chickens and turkeys, to isolate from the oil this very, very toxic compound that was killing chickens. And I worked on it a couple of years and finally get it more or less pure, but I never gave it a name because I didn't know its exact structure. And so I left that project in 1965, took my new position at a university and another university. And a couple of years later, some chemists in Washington, this is right in the middle of the Vietnam War. And there's something mysterious about this Agent Orange killing people. And so they were trying to isolate the compound out of that. All of a sudden realized that I had isolated a couple of years before. And so they wanted me to come and tell my story. So I did. Well, at that point in time, and then they gave it the name Dioxin. But then therein, for the next 25 years or so, I started having problems with my speech. I had sinuses that were cauterized, had to be cauterized. I had all kinds of problems. I had a friend who was working on it at the time. He died at age 41. So I had these difficulties. And finally, in the late 80s, I could hardly speak anymore. It was a neurological problem. And what I did, the National Health Association, the oldest health group in the country, I should say, they invited me to come and speak to their convention, because this was the time when the New York Times came out with our study in China and highlighted it, and they wanted to hear me talk. And I said, I struggled, so I said, I can't talk. They said, well, come here anyhow. We got some people here that aren't the traditional doctors. So I went down and struggled through a talk. And then they got me, 10 of them got me off into a room. They looked at my case and said they thought they had something to offer that might cure it. That turned out to be fasting, water-only fasting. Alan Goldhammer, to be specific. And so that's where I met Alan. And I did lots of other things too, went all kinds of doctors and stuff, but I went to Alan's place and did a fast for 2 weeks. And I didn't think I accomplished much, to be honest about it. And so what Alan told me was, you got to come back here again. He said, sometimes this takes a while. So I came back about a year later. And I was having to quit lecturing at that time. And anyhow, I came back a year later with Karen because she had an asthma problem. We went through another 10-day, 12-day fast, I guess it was. And sure enough, when I came home that time, just about, what was it, 3 weeks later or something like that, all of a sudden my speech problems started to clear up. And I had myself tested and I had no dioxin. Whereas before I'd been tested by the Canadian authorities, I had dioxin in my blood 800 times the maximum amount allowed. And now, I might tell you, AJ, the dioxin problem really became a serious problem in Vietnam because there were people in Vietnam dying from this spray, this Agent Orange. Soldiers were dying. And they've kept a track of that ever since. This is, at that time. They're estimating now that more than 300,000 American soldiers died of dioxin poisoning. That's 5 times the level who died in battle. That dioxin is got to be the most toxic event in the history of the human race, I think, just about. So I was into this diet thing, and I attribute my case, and with that fasting, going out to Alan Goldhammer's, who's one of the leaders of the National Health Association, wonderful organization, by the way. So, and in fact, they're having a conference coming up in June. I think it's their 75th year conference in Cleveland, Ohio. It's really quite an exciting opportunity. But there's other people there, sort of like me, just being sort of a little bit different, being critics of the system, and so that was part of my story. And when we did that, by the way, we hadn't yet completely changed our diet. And that was 1990, I think it was, something like that. We hadn't completely changed, but then going out to Alan's, he was talking about, going on a completely plant-based diet. He kind of liked what I was doing. I got interested in what he was doing. The combination of fasting, trying to set me on a path, then making sure that, it's all plant-based after that. I'm sitting here talking about it. Whereas, that wasn't likely. So it took quite a long time, actually. It took at least 10 years of making a switch. But one of the keys, you'll know this, I think. One of the key things that we do know, I'm sure you've seen this yourself. People can try, they have problems and they can try this and, trying to make a switch and they can't quite stick with it. They can see the benefits within 10 days usually, or something like that, or 2 weeks, but they just don't stay with it. It's a very poor record. You know what keeps them on people keeping on this? And this is work out of Italy, some friends of mine. If people will come into trying this, and no matter how hard it is, if they'll stay on it for at least 20 days, maybe a little longer for some folks, even longer than that, what happens, our taste preferences change. When our taste preferences change, then we don't want to go back. That's pretty simple. That's the way biology works. Our body becomes accustomed to eating wrong food all our lives. And so all of a sudden to try to change is difficult, almost impossible. And it's like you're stopping smoking cigarettes. It's a similar kind of thing. Pretty soon you get to that point where you say, hey, this is not so bad. And then you don't want to go back. So
I agree with you. And, you mentioned at the beginning of the show about how there's a financial incentives for people to not eat healthfully. But I also think food addiction is part of this because it's difficult for people because their taste buds have been steeped in sugar, fat, and salt their whole life, whether they're eating animal products or not. And even when they know the truth, it's so difficult for them to implement.
Absolutely. That's the story in a nutshell.
Yep. Hey, Dr. Campbell, your last book is called The Future of Nutrition, and I'm curious what the future of the plant-based movement is. Where do you see it headed in the next 50 years?
Well, I think it's headed in a good place, I believe. What we need to bring under control. First thing, very practical thing. Medical schools need to teach nutrition. Not one medical school in the country teaches nutrition. So doctors are not exposed to this topic. And there's a reason for it, because the whole art of medicine is to be able to treat disease with specific drugs, specific ages, changing one nutrient at a time, so forth and so on. That's what it's all about. They don't advocate, total wholesale change. And so I think that's what we need to come to recognize. Teach nutrition. This is a matter for the policymakers to take seriously, at a very senior level. And I worked quite a bit in that territory. They've got to take this seriously, recognize what it is. And then after that, just find ways, to have, let's say, one thing we could do is have some open debates on the public media. That, more than 70% of the advertising of news media sources, 70% is by the drug companies. How can people on air keep their jobs if they start, telling what I consider to be the truth? It's not very easy. And so we are living in a system that's actually preaching information that sells instead of information that creates health. In other words, we're creating wealth for the few at the expense of health for the many. So with that thought in mind, I think the only way to really get on track is finding ways, for one thing, to simplify this message, which we talk about, and then get on with having debates with others, like that person you said. He said that John say, I would debate that person in a second. I'd like to know the data. That's the way it works. And I guess the data right now, after all these years, that it's just we can't go back. I'm really convinced that this is the way we should live our lives and eat this way. Or otherwise it's the end of the road, let's face it.
If I can set that up, I sure will. I'd asked you about what your professional career highlights were. You mentioned students. What about being in Forks Over Knives? Was that literally a game changer for you?
Yeah, that was nice. Brian Wendell and Lee Fulkerson, who were organizing that in the beginning, they came up. I was giving a lecture or something like that, and Papa John McDougall's actually at Dr. McDougall's, and they took me up to a room, wanted to know if I would agree to participate, and they were thinking about putting that together, and I said, yeah, I would. So yeah, that was I didn't know where I was going to go, because in those days, you do a video here and there. They're nice, but they took it pretty seriously. Obviously, Lee was really good. He was an artist and trying to organize the thoughts, and then of course Esselstyn came on board too. Good friend of mine, obviously.
Did you know Dr. Esselstyn before the movie?
Yeah, I did. I knew him a little bit before that, because this is 2011. I had known S from the early 1990s. And the reason it's interesting, when New York Times came out with an article in 1990 about the China study, and it headlined it. It was a feature article in their science section. So it got quite a bit of play at the time. And lo and behold, this guy calls me up on the phone. I got some calls, but he introduced himself and said that he was doing some work, with people, on heart disease. And so we got to know each other. That's Dr. Esselstyn. We became good friends. He invited me out to a conference he was organizing in Arizona at the time, and then another one, Disney World. And so we got to know, with each of us knowing what the other's doing. And it's kind of like a hand in glove kind of thing. And of course, Dean Ornish, I met Dean Ornish, McDougall, right there at the beginning. And all three of them had been doing, stuff that would lean in this direction without a doubt. And I had some science, and it all kind of fit together. And so ever since, yeah, we've been good friends. And when you take the practical side, seeing the heart disease reversed, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, who's going to, you get impressed, to say the least. And I've seen that, of course, on numerous occasions with other people. having all kinds of problems. It's not just heart disease, it's just every which way. My son Tom is right now doing some very exciting stuff with cancer, the first time it's been done.
Really? Tell us about it. I'd love to have him on the show again. He's wonderful.
He's in a, right now he's in a little bit of sensitive spot because he's he's sitting in a position to, I don't want to answer more details because I don't want to confound it, but he's got some really good data that are pointing us in that direction. It's really great, and kind of excited about it. But
well, when he's able to share, please let us know.
yeah, I sure will. He did have one publication. He himself is now his MD. He's in the University of Rochester Medical Center, but he actually had one study. It's a study of one person called, case study, if you will, but it done so well and so thoroughly that a 69-year-old man, stage 3 chronic kidney disease, and he put him on this, made him stick to it, and after 4 months, the guy was back to what he felt like when he was 20. So the story goes, and he was about to go into what do you call it?
Dialysis?
Dialysis, yeah. And so he didn't have to do that. And so.
That's amazing. So we talked a little bit about career highlights. What about personal lifetime highlights? Do you have any of those?
Oh yeah. I mean, what do I have? One I do remember very well, stayed with me all my life, and that was my dad. He was a farmer. He only had 2 years of elementary school education, so there was no education in our family, and he basically organized it so that we were about 50 miles west of Washington, D.C. on a farm. He didn't want me to go to the local high school. He said, so he arranged it for me to drive. First year he drove, but to drive for 5 years, just over 100 miles a day to go to high school, a public school, because it was a public school because it's free and he didn't have money to do anything else. So, and the thing he said really stuck with me. He said, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, whatever else I did. And so that was a big deal. And so I got an education and, all of that, and kind of set me up so yeah, that's maybe one of the biggest things. Yeah. And Karen telling me to write the China study. Well, I wasn't inclined to do that.
Smart woman you married, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your dad was amazing. Yeah,
he had a great integrity, a great reputation among the farmers in the county for integrity. I met people who tears came to their eyes when he talked about it. I mean, I just, so you can't.
That is beautiful. How do you feel, like, in general? I mean, may I say your age? Is that permissible to? Okay,
89.
89. You'll be 90 next year. Hopefully, there'll be a big party. And how do you feel?
Well, I don't take drugs. I haven't. No, just occasionally I've tried, a couple of things, but basically I don't live on drugs. I live on food. But I feel really good. I don't know whether it's a little bit, people find it controversial, I guess, but I don't care. I'm going to say it. When the pandemic arose and that virus arose, there was a lot of wild claims being made about it. You're going to die if you don't do this and that stuff like that. And I was in my principal professional arena, the early part of my career for the first 10, 15 years was pharmacology. So I was very much imbued into the drug approach, if you will, and studying stuff that way. And anyhow, I saw what they were saying. I could not believe what they were saying. To me, it was not reliable. So everybody, especially our age, is supposed to get vaccinated. I did not. Karen and I did not. And for a reason, because we had done work on viruses and we had data from China. It was spectacular. Almost 9,000 people we had tested for their active virus and inactive virus and antibodies and all the rest. It was a very serious virus. It's what causes liver cancer, which is the 5th leading cause of death in the world, by the way. Very serious virus. What we found, and this is a big study, the best data I think I've ever gotten, people who consume a little bit of animal food, even only 1/10 of what we do in the West, they were the ones that got the virus, did not get the antibodies, and they died. They had a much higher rate of getting liver cancer. People consuming plant foods, no, they formed antibodies, and they did not get the liver cancer, according to the highly significant results we got. So I had a lot of confidence in the fact that this nutrition thing that works on heart disease and cancer also works on viruses too. So I did it with that in mind, and we didn't get the vaccine. And people thought we were crazy, and all those were some kind of conspiracy group or something crazy like that. And so went on, and finally, just last October, we did get infected. We were tested positive, but we didn't get the headaches, the nausea, and all that sort of stuff, and came through it without the vaccine. And I know they were so effective in scaring the devil out of everybody in the country, for whatever reason people want to think about. So we didn't do that. I just wanted, I wanted to publish it, by the way, this data we had, to 2 of the best almost number one, number 2 journals in the world, and I published there before. I sent it in, and I saw something that I never saw in my life. I've written close to 375 publications. I've been very active in that area. I sent it for publication. The people who looked at it would not even allow the scientists to review it, as I said before. They said, we're not going to review it. And so that happened 2 different journals. That was scary. And I say that is a really serious problem, because now even science, as I've known it, grown up with it, and have a great deal of respect for the way it's supposed to work, they didn't even want the public to get out to the public. So that's the way it was.
How do you spend your days?
Oh, in front of the computer mostly. I got to finish this book, but yeah, that's it. I'm done. After that, I'm going to be doing some other things. And
oops, we got another super chat. Thank you, Billy. Are you using the same publisher?
Yes. At this point in time, I don't mean to make a confession here on this video, but yes, that's it. That's the intent.
Nice. Good. So maybe it'll come out next year sometime.
Yes, I hope so. Maybe this fall.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you're feeling well, and you have Karen to make all your delicious meals, so you don't have to deal with that.
As I said one time before, when they were trying to put all those recipes in the book in the beginning, I said, I don't even know where the pots and pans in the kitchen are. Why would I do that? So,
a lucky man. It seems like all the wonderful men in the plant-based movement have wonderful people behind them, like Karen and Mary McDougall and Ann Esselstyn, to make their meals.
it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have time to exercise in the day? Do you still exercise?
Yeah, I do. That's critical, by the way. I'm really keen on that. I did get some problems, and maybe because of age, or maybe because of the dioxin problem. I don't know. I was getting difficulties with balance, and some that sort of nonsense, and little brain fog, if you will. I said, oh, it makes this age. But anyhow, exercise is the key to keep that in the background. So we walk every day, never fail. And I do some special exercises in the morning too. So it's working out pretty well. Yeah.
Good. You know what I think? I've interviewed you a few times. You don't seem to have any pets. Is that correct?
Pets?
Pets.
Grew up with in my lifetime growing up, 3 dogs. They did everything with me. I did everything with them. Yes, I do. But very much. That's fine. That's great. I don't know whether that's the argument, though. This, standalone kind of argument. Some people, yes, fine, dandy. If you use that as the argument for changing your diet, so you don't eat animals. But one of the troubles me to be honest about it, AJ, is the vegan community of focusing on that as if that is the one and only way that we should behave. Just to have pets. But then they don't talk enough about the biggest challenge on that front, incidentally, is let's decide not to eat the animals. We're eating them by the billions, almost on a daily basis for crying out loud. So that to me is the biggest issue of all. Yeah, sure, I would have a pet. We never had a pet in the house. So being on a farm, you didn't bring dogs in the house. And so that was my ticket. I got some great stories to tell about the dog I had. There were 3 dogs over that period of time. But yeah, so I can appreciate, those kind of movements, those kind of sentiments. That's not the issue. It's just what I'm more interested in, and became interested in, was how do you tell the story in a way that the public can get to know it? And to use that argument all by itself, I was convinced that's not going to convince everybody of changing their ways.
Yeah, but sometimes you wonder what will, Hey, this is an interesting question from Dina. Did you ever smoke?
Yeah, I did very, very shortly, and only at nighttime, just, sitting around. And when I was in college, or not in college, my graduate school days. Yeah, I did it for maybe, what was it? 2 years, 3 years. It wasn't much. And so I quit that early on.
Fantastic. Here's a fun question from Melanie. What is your favorite meal?
Whatever Karen fixes, she does it. We have low fat. You know that story really well. You've got quite a name for yourself. The added oil, that's not good, or added sugar, added salt. Kind of stay away from that. And, vegetables, always vegetables, greens, lots of greens. Of course, tubers as well, for a source of energy. And I don't know. I can't put my finger on one very well. It's just a mixture of a variety. I'm not sure I have a favorite meal. There was one that we called the Dominican dish for a while. I kind of liked. It was rice and beans. Our daughter Leanne was in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, so we got caught on to that because that, in a sense, in a primitive way, it was a popular dish, and so Karen turned it into, with rice, using brown rice and lots of salad, dumping a lot of salad on top of that, and some other dressing, good dressings without the oil. Yeah, that combination was that has been quite served us well.
Did you go on the cruise this year?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I'd say I did not do that. Sandy Pukel, a very good friend. He's been a fantastic job. I think I'd gone for 13 years, each time, and no, I didn't this time because wait a minute, was 1920? I haven't done it in 2 years. Yeah.
Well, I just remember that I would go to bed at 9 o'clock and you'd be up on the top deck dancing the night away.
Yeah, that was one of the fun things I did. Yeah.
So there's a question that was sent in advance to us from Susan. Dr. Campbell, how do you feel about the promotion of high amounts of omega-3 fatty acids like flax seeds, or the promotion of supplements like DHA? Are there downsides or potential harmful consequences from taking too much fatty acids as a nutrient or supplement?
Well, I'm not into the supplements, to be honest about it, and I did that for 2 reasons. One is that the science doesn't support that, because there's supplements have been used and tested as if they're good, and they are good when we see them as food. In other words, they're part of food, right? The classic example of that was published in 1981 with beta carotene. At that time, beta carotene was a very promising supplement. It's the precursor for vitamin A. It's called like provitamin A, essentially. And there was a study done among smokers that had been smoking for 30 years, at least 30 years. So these are high-risk lung cancer patients, right? So they found that people smoking longer period of time, they get more lung cancer. That's pretty clear. And the ones smoking 30 years or more, they're the ones who got the most lung cancer, obviously. Well, within that group, they decided to do something else at that time. They decided to measure in the blood something about nutrition among that group. And they got the most spectacular results. Beta carotene in the blood, which is a reflection of consuming plants, if you will, particularly green leafy plants. Beta carotene was the lowest in the ones among these smokers. All had a very high risk for lung cancer. And they divided them in 4 parts, a perfect dose-response relationship. The more beta carotene in the blood, the less lung cancer. In fact, it was so spectacular that people smoking for 30 years who had the highest beta carotene levels in blood, their risk of getting lung cancer was about the same as non-smokers. And I saw that at the time and sort of got involved in that conversation on a professional side to some extent. Well, what came out of that study was that, oh, wow, this beta carotene really looks pretty special. What is it? And so what they decided to do, and this was the second study, was between Finland and the United States. What they did, they organized a group of 29,000 smokers, and they decided to give them beta carotene, the supplement beta carotene. This is when supplements were first being introduced, more or less. And they did a study, and they figured they had to go at least 8 years to see a result. Well, they had to quit after 5 years because the people smoking and getting the most beta carotene, it didn't depress lung cancer, actually increased lung cancer. This is classic. So beta carotene in the form of food works like other nutrients. When you take it out and you put it in a supplement like that, it does not. It has the opposite effect. It significantly increased lung cancer risk. So, well, shortly after that, I was actually asked by the National Academy of Science to represent them in big trials that were being held on the whole question about supplements. And so it was my job to look at all the claims that were being made about it. And it became clear to me supplements not the way to go. That's one point. So I had that background in one sense. On what you just asked for about the fat and omega-3s and omega-6s, omega-3s, we can't convert it necessarily all the right way. And we need to have the product, the DHA, if you will, since we don't get enough omega-3s. That's a very narrow point of view, especially in the light of not knowing what supplements really do. And so the omega-3, it doesn't act alone necessarily by itself. The really important thing is the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So if we're on a high omega-6 diet, that puts some omega-3 in there. You can see some interesting data that look like it might help. But you just what, and then also add the product of omega-3 in respect of what people necessarily do and expect to get those results. They both have the downsides. I mean, I'm talking about all of mostly theory, but also real life, data. And so I don't go for the omega-3, to be honest about it, or DHA, because it's a sidetrack. It's a good way to make money, but it steers people away from what they really need to do. The basic thing is use the whole food. They do not need to, focus on those individual nutrients like that. So I actually gave testimony on that in some major hearings at the time, and I was really pressed, to make the argument, the basis for the discussion. So yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, there's some disagreement about that, as I'm sure you know, in the plant-based community.
Yeah, I know, but I want to see the results. So those who disagree, I want to see the results. I want to see it published. I want to see it organized in a proper way. Everybody can form opinions. That's what I said before. We all have opinions. We don't know we can have the wrong opinions. It has to be formally done, really, and show the effect. That's the only way I can accept it.
Great. Peter says, Dr. Campbell is the nutrition science messiah. And this is just a fun question from Randy, who's watching live. What was your favorite automobile?
Oh my gosh, I'm not sure I had any. I had a Datsun, when I was in college, and just for sentimental reasons, I had that little yellow Datsun. But other than that, I like I've just had recently an opportunity to ride in a Tesla a couple of times, and all the things they do is impressive. But that's not in my pocketbook actually. And so it looks like a promising car because the ones that are not using gas, if you will, that's the way we need to go. So anything to go in that direction is one of my favorites. Has to be.
Nice. But did you have because you saw a lot of cars. I mean, you're older than other people, so you saw some really classic cars growing up, probably.
Yeah, well, the first car I drove was a Model T Ford, 1929 Model T Ford, believe it or not. And it was still running really well, and that's where I learned to drive. It was on a farm actually, and I drove it around, and we pulled out the rumble seat in the back, and we could put corn stalks in there and stuff we carried around. And I did that for a while, and then tipped it over in a ditch one time. But yeah, that's where I learned my lessons. Model T Ford.
Hey, I don't think I've ever heard you mention this. How did you and Karen meet?
Oh my gosh. This is kind of interesting. So I was in school, of course, and I didn't get excited about marriage at all until I finished up my PhD. Came back home again, and I owed some money, and I had an opportunity to work in India. My dad said, no, you can't do that. You got to pay off your debt first. That was near home in Virginia, Northern Virginia, outside of Washington. So I came there, and I was looking around for a job. And I just happened to, on that day I was looking for a job, I wrote into this testing laboratory, FDA testing laboratory, which was kind of in my territory. And I walked in, and there was an opportunity, and the guy hired me almost on the spot, I guess. And I came back the next Monday. That was on Friday. On Monday, I came back in. She was sitting there. And so she was assigned to me as my secretary. And so one thing led to another. We obviously, I guess, fancied each other. And so that's the way it started. We had 5 children, and now we got 11 grandchildren. But, I tell you, I just came back. What's today, Tuesday? Yeah, I just gave a lecture in just about a block away from that place, just a block in that town. It's right near Dulles Airport. And that's where I met her, and we married there in the church, right in the site of the stage that I was speaking on. So, yeah, it was just, as I say, that was 61 years ago.
You've been married for 61 years?
Well, it'll be 61 this September. So, yeah.
60 years. Wow, that's fantastic.
No,
you're talking about
61 in September. Yeah.
61. Well, congratulations. That's something to be said for having a marriage that long. So you were talking about the link between animal protein and cancer. And one of the viewers, Nancy, is asking, what do you think about alcohol? Because many of the doctors that come on the show talk about the strong link between alcohol and at least certain types of cancer.
True. And I agree with them. I didn't automatically believe that in the beginning necessarily. I'd like to have a beer and some wine and stuff like that. But the work of Walt Willett and his group at Harvard, I thought was pretty convincing. They had a big group of people and following them. And the nail in the coffin really was for breast cancer, I think. That alcohol is just, you have to declare it a poison. It really is. It's that strong. The data are really impressive. And people would drink more alcoholic drinks, if you will. Breast cancer is one of the key cancers that are affected. And and we've worked out some of the details of that in science. And so it's really unmistakable, I think. As far as alcohol for other cancers concerned, I know it's been mentioned for colon cancer and a couple of others. So yeah, we don't need it. And I say the data for breast cancer especially is pretty damning.
Yeah. Well, it's not a whole plant.
No, it's not.
Like you mentioned, a lot of the viewers were impressed that you knew how many years you were married, because a lot of men don't even know the date of their anniversary.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow. That's a pretty big event. I would think they should know that.
You're funny. What, not that you're going anywhere anytime soon, but what do you think you'd like to most be remembered for? Telling the truth.
Having fun, I guess. I just chose a career, thanks to older people really kind of coaching me and giving me opportunities. I didn't have any things set in mind when I was young, but I just kind of fell in one thing after another. And the science, I like that a lot. And to be remembered for, I don't know. I won't know that. I just don't know. I really enjoyed science and teaching me, a lot of things that had fun relating to other people. And then finding so many people who seem to like that idea. And yeah, that's just sticking with it, in spite of the difficulties of pushback, I guess, which we have to do in these days, because the pushback is really serious. If you get in this business, especially in the scientific establishment, if you get in this business, especially talking about the things I did, wow, you get tremendous pushback. And for some reason, I was lucky to believe in that concept, that you just tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yeah.
I did not create that word, that phrase, as you know. So, but my dad really took it very seriously.
Yeah.
So just sticking with it, just having persistence.
So you don't seem to get your feathers ruffled easily. Is that correct?
There's something that's all relative, I'm sure. Not too much. I've just learned to deal with. I can always fall back on that idea, and even though I may say things and do things that are very unpopular, and maybe it goes up against stuff, they can do all they want to say what they want about it. But my answer to that is, I'm willing to be wrong. That's for sure. I'm willing to be wrong, but I want it done in the right way. Somebody who has a different point of view, I want them to show me the data and say it publicly and just show it. So, okay, here's look at this, all this. Here's the way I got it, and here's what it does. It's the only way I can move right in that way. And unfortunately, most people don't do that. They just get caught up in believing what they want to believe for whatever reason, and then kind of get stuck in it. I'm talking about most people. I'm talking about those who are out there preaching, to other people. I think going out there and standing, up in front of other people and telling them what you believe, you better be telling the truth. I can't stand the thought of if they say something wrong, okay, that's fine, that's great, I learned something, but it has to be that way.
Colleen would like to know, who are some of your favorite plant-based doctors and colleagues?
Well, a couple of them are not very well known. One of them, because they're into science, and so they came to it for several reasons, what I did. One guy, his name is Timothy Key, and the Oxford University in Ireland or England. We published with them. He comes strictly from the scientific point of view. He's not out lecturing, but he's a very honorable fellow. Another is David Jenkins.
I know him. He's been on the show. He's a lovely man.
Yeah, David and I've been friends for a long time, and he's trained well, and he was into veganism, I think, fairly early age. He wasn't telling anybody about it, interestingly, but yeah, he got with the science and kind of stuck with it. He's been involved in policy work like I have, and so we've crossed paths that way. Otherwise, I don't hate to mention people because then somebody else would be annoyed because I didn't mention them, but I'll mention a couple. Caldwell Esselstyn, very good friend of mine. He seemed that what I liked about his approach was the way he handles patients. And he's very sincere about what he does. He really cares about his patients. Two big things. And so we did lots of things together, went to China together and all kinds of stuff like that. So I give him high marks in my book, if you will. There's a lot of good people. John McDougall earned, came to know him early on. He was out there, had some courage, and when he was at school in Hawaii, and he just thought he saw something, about the native Polynesians, and the younger people were not as good at health as the older people. Really, what it was, and he stood up to voice his opinion, and got some flack on that one, but he kind of stuck with it. I like that kind of attitude. Dean Orish, another one. Dean Orish went outside and did his own thing with, at a Holiday Inn, I think it was, got some money, I believe some money from Texaco. I don't know whether it's true or not, but we've been very good friends, and he likes to get into some of the details of the science to justify his work. And Michael Clapper, I have to mention him. I think Michael Clapper he's a first-class individual any way you look at it.
Yep. So you mentioned China, and Joyce said, if you could live in another country, which one would you find the most ideal?
Scotland. My father was an immigrant from Northern Ireland, Scotch-Irish background, so I'm kind of locked into where my ancestors came from. We've been there. I like that part of the world. Yeah.
Are you currently reading any books?
No, well, I just finished one. What is it? Let me see if they got it here. Oh, here.
And do you read only nonfiction, or do you ever read fiction?
I have read fiction, of course, but not too often. I guess.
Me neither. It's weird that I almost never read fiction books. I prefer nonfiction.
Yeah, well, that's what I do. This in here, I advertise this guy. I don't know him personally. It's a story messenger, comic perspective on civilization. Neil Tyson.
What's it about? What's it about, Dr. Campbell?
And he really gets into the question concerning, evaluating science. He's an astrophysicist. In fact, he's the director of the, what's the name of the big astrophysics museum in New York City. I can't think of it. So he goes through making arguments about how to evaluate science, if you will. Of course, I like that. He's not on the same wavelength with me, though, on his ideas about biology. I've been trying to get a hold of him. I'd like to be on the air with him. He gets a lot of TV time, but I got to get him. I mean, I like his way of thinking, but somehow he never got caught up in the idea of biology. He's more in astrophysics.
The Hayden Planetarium?
Oh, yeah, Hayden Planetarium, yeah.
Jay wants to know if you're still on the lecture circuit.
Yes, I have been. Even during this pandemic, I've been to a few places. Got to call that to a halt here soon. Yeah, I got more. I don't know. I got plenty of invitations, but I don't like to turn down people, but I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah, if you want to finish your book in time.
Yeah.
Do you ever do anything just for fun, like watch a show?
Yeah. Recently doing some of that.
Like, can I ask what you enjoy when you do watch?
Well, you're going to think I'm a bit nuts that it was all in the same stream, but there's a show on that's called Amsterdam, I think, Amsterdam Hospital, something like that. It's a sort of a bunch of episodes, quite a few of them, about a hospital setting, and just finished all those. And I just keeps trying to sort out in my mind what was the purpose of all that. But what they actually show is what it's like to be in a hospital, a very busy hospital with, a lot of tragic things happening. And so I don't know, I'm sort of in that territory, of course, and I get caught up in that, but I don't, and yeah, you're asking a question I'm embarrassed to say. I don't do enough relaxing to do that kind of thing. I'm always caught up in, whatever it is, science, politics. Yeah, I get very caught up in the political affairs of the day.
That's okay. You as long as you're enjoying your life. I'm curious, the books that you wrote, the China Study, the Future of Nutrition, if you were rewriting them today or updating them, is there anything you would change or add?
Well, that's what I'm doing with this new book. I wouldn't change. I would add to it. I mean, those 3 books and another one that were just kind of a learning curve for me. First, the China Study was, come to realize this concept of so-called holism, everything working together, which is quite a departure from some of the things we do in science, especially the way we do in medicine. And the second one, whole, then I try to get into a little discussion on, what's a scientific basis for that concept. And the last one, which I did with my grandson, believe it or not, he's a good writer, the Future of Nutrition, where I'm trying to outline there, document, if you will, some of the mistakes we've made in the past. And we've made some serious mistakes that are still hanging around as if they are fact. And what they do is actually mislead people. So that's what the Future of Nutrition was. And this one here is more about, well, as I said before, the kind of things I saw firsthand is not in the interest of the public, but nonetheless got adopted.
Have all the Campbells somewhat followed in the family footsteps?
Yeah, there's 20, I think right now, counting spouses, I guess there's 24 of us, 25. Everyone eats this. We all do, no exceptions. And Karen.
Let's make it easy for Thanksgiving meals.
Oh, yeah. Karen had a lot to do with that, really. I'm really serious about that. She raised the kids. I mean, some of them were already in their teens when we started, but nonetheless, that's what was for dinner. If they wanted to eat at our house, that's what they ate. But they got into it really early. All our grandchildren got it from day one. So yeah, we don't have anybody straying. One got onto maybe occasionally have a hamburger. I'm not going to say which one, but he's on track too.
That's great. Do they, I mean, we know that your son Tom is a doctor. Leanne has written so many plant-based books. Nelson, documentary filmmaker. So do all of them do something in the plant-based space?
Most of them. And Nelson's into filmmaking. He's got a new film that was he'll, I guess, tell you about it. It won the Diamond Award in the Los Angeles Festival. That's been quite impressive. Piece. He did plant purification. Leanne, our daughter, she got her doctorate in curriculum development education. And then she was in the Peace Corps, before that. She's now in the Dominican Republic, and she's made she got a big reputation in that part of the Dominican Republic. And our online program with Cornell, nutritionstudies.org, we have a new dimension, new direction for that. And that is, we've just got a big chunk of land right near her that for years was used for raising cattle, sending meat to deer. And so we now bought the land with a big chunk of it. And all the forest was torn down. It's a really sad story. Semi-tropical forest, actually, in serving the community, all the kind of things that you and I like and others. But then a guy bought the land some years ago. He was the henchman for the dictator Trujillo. And he was responsible for killing, the enemies. And so then he had all these cattle, for years. So we just succeeded in getting that. We're going to have a new program of being able to take students down there for, 10-day tours and stuff, learning how the environment connects with food. That's one of the biggest stories of all these days. Consuming the wrong food, it makes us sick, right? it's livestock. That's the same thing that leads to the destruction of the environment. It's the number one cause of climate problems. It all hangs in together. It's also the number one cost of healthcare. We have exorbitant healthcare costs. It causes a lot of bankruptcies of a lot of families when they get older because they're eating wrong food and getting sick and all that sort of stuff. So we got this program now with our nonprofit that Leanne is now the president of that. And she's the one that, with her staff, got some good things going. Tom is a physician at University of Rochester Medical Center. Of course, he co-authored the book with me, the China study. Yeah, they're all, the others who didn't quite get there, nonetheless, have taken great interest in it. One of them is a special ed teacher in schools, really work with children, and he had me come and speak to all the what is it, the superintendent's group meeting or whatever it was. And another one's into working on AI as it relates to trade and economic development. So.
I see Karen over your shoulder in the kitchen. Is it after dinner?
No, no, it's not.
Uh-oh.
She usually, if I do these things, she wants to get out of sight because she.
Then I better let you go so you don't even know what you're having for dinner tonight.
No, we did have it just before this.
Oh, what'd you have?
What did I have? Sort of like just we eat light this time of night. Remains meals at noontime, like the Adventists.
Yes. Do you know who Dr. John Scharfenberg is?
No, but I gave a lot of lectures to the Adventist group.
Yeah, he's an Adventist physician who's almost 100, and he was on my show, and he doesn't eat dinner. He eats breakfast and lunch.
Come this time of night, you just finish off. I just had a sandwich and some greens, and that was it. But you really eat really light if you eat it all. But that's what they do, and it's kind of a nice way to do things, I think.
Yeah, it's hard socially. It's a little bit more challenging, but
yeah, that's right. It is.
It's because most people are working during the day, and that's the meal that they get to eat together. But hey, it seems to work for him. He's almost 100.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd love for you to meet him. He's a dear man, just like you. Any closing thoughts, Dr. Campbell? Any message that you want the world to know?
Probably for young people. I work so much with students at that particular age. I think we all know that those of us who are older now, that if we looked at a part of our lives that was maybe more determinative of what we were to become, it's that age when you're just coming out of high school and then, going into your college years or whatever one chooses to do. To make decisions at that point in time, they're lifelong decisions. And I've gotten some feelings about that, that young people somehow, their thoughts wander all over the place, like what we all did, this way and that way, stuff like that. But those decisions made at that point in our lives are critical. And I don't know, I just like to tell young people, take a close look, take time before you go off and, get hooked up and sort of get some sense about what you're doing before you decide to do it. And do what one likes, obviously. And, it can work, enjoy going to work every day. Yes. Too many people don't have that opportunity. They can't step back and try to decide those things. They just have to do what they have to do to make some money. I understand that. So I'm more of a progressive in that sense, concerned about the people in our society who are disadvantaged through no fault of their own. And so I'm big on our society looking after each other a little bit more.
Well, Dr. Campbell, it's such a pleasure catching up with you. It's been a couple of years since you've been on the show. I hope it won't be that long till the next appearance, and that you'll come on whenever your book is getting ready to launch so that we can let people know about it.
Well, I'd be glad to. And as always, this is you're an engaging public
Well, thank you. And they don't know about the fun times we've had together in airports telling jokes that are not appropriate for this show. You have the best sense of humor. Yeah. Well, love to Karen, Dr. Campbell.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. It's really,
No,
really been.
thank you. It was such a pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please tune in tomorrow for 2 more Campbells. Nelson Campbell and Kim Campbell will be on the show at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks again, Dr. Campbell. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.